everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So today is going to be more of a, based off of what you saw in the title, more of a discussion video, in particular what's been happening on Dark Romance Book Talk. As somebody who is a part of Dark Romance Book Talk, I thought this story was really important and impactful, especially when it comes to discussion about book talk as well as Dark Romance Book Talk. And the story I'm going to be talking about is how an author used a real-life serial killer to promote one of her books. Yeah, you heard that right. An author chose to use a real-life serial killer to promote one of her books. This serial killer is one that's been very prevalent on TikTok and in particular Book Talk. Wadewilson, not Deadpool, but like wadewilson, and like an actual person. People call him also the Deadpool killer. He's a guy that has like those tattoos all over his body, that like white supremacist tattoos. He's also popular because some women find him attractive. Full disclosure here, when I first saw him, I thought he looked like he smelled like cigarettes. I did not find that man attractive at all. But then when I heard the crimes that he had committed, it really stirred up in me, how could anyone find someone like that attractive at all? Simp over them or whatever. It was just horrific hearing this. And so the fact that an author would use this real life serial killer as a promotion for her book is just so dark and disturbing. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you don't know me, hi, I'm Jerry, and welcome to my channel where I mostly talk about books, book discussions, and yeah, so follow along. So I want to start off with, again, who is Wadewilson? I have linked down below some true crime channels who have done a very good job diving deep into Wadewilson and the crimes that he committed. So if you want to get a deeper dive into why this guy is awful and is currently on death row, you can watch those videos that I've linked down below. But to give a short summary, Wadewilson, a serial killer. He unalived two women, them being Christine Melton and Diana Ruiz. He also almost unalived his ex-girlfriend as well. He was recently put on death row. I'm not going to get to the gory details of the crime, but I did watch some of the coverage that was on TikTok as well as in some of those podcasts, and the story is absolutely sad, tragic. One of the parts that really got me choked up was seeing the testimony from women's son, who was talking about his life without his mother and how tough it has been to go through milestones without her being there. And seeing that was just so heartbreaking and really a reminder of just how tragic and heartbreaking life can be. And I think that's missing from a lot of the discussion about Wadewilson, is the fact that this man simply took away these people's friends and family members. And he's not a character. These women aren't just characters. This isn't a TV show. This is real life. This is people's real life. It's not something to be taken lightly, which I think a lot of the time with the genre of true crime, and as someone who myself consumes true crime, you sometimes can forget the fact that this is people's reality. This did happen to a real life person, and it should be taken in serious, which I think that's what this author was caught up in. Not giving her an excuse whatsoever, but I definitely think she falls into the crowd who looks at true crime as entertainment and doesn't look at the victims and their stories. So knowing all of that, this author still chose to use Wadewilson to promote one of her books. This author, who I'm not going to say her name or her book because I don't want to give any promotion to it, and also if you really want to find out who she is, it's all over Book Talk. This author's book, it's all over Book Talk. I'm gonna read to you what the book is about. My notes are over here. This book is intended for adults that are 18 plus. Please be advised and read the list of trigger warnings before continuing. Winona Grace, a 26-year-old woman hailing from Alabama, has a deeply rooted aspiration to seek justice for her younger sister, who tragically passed away at the tender age of 9. Driven by the quest for justice, she embarks on a career in law enforcement with the sole purpose of bringing Nancy's killer to his knees. She embarks on a journey that leads her to the town of Fort Myers, Florida. While there, she assumes the role of a correctional officer at Fort Myers Penitentiary. The most significant aspect aspect of her narrative is the impediment she ultimately faces when she is put on death row. As she delves into the investigation to solve her sister's murder, she unexpectedly finds herself falling in love with a man she never thought she would. Throughout the tumultuous journey of loss and discovery, she comes to understand that not all love stories lead to a happy ending. This is a inmate correctional officer romance, and the inmate, from what the author said, unalived multiple people, and that's how they were put on death row. Which, okay, to be completely transparent here, I don't think I'd want to read a book about someone who murdered multiple people falling in love. But hey, that's just my own opinion. If whatever floats your boat, but just personally, I don't want to. But the author said she used Wade Wilson because he was one of the most recent famous people to be put on death row. And again, she probably also saw a lot of women thirsting over him. She tried to say that if you like the story or like the look of this guy or want something or want some sort of a book version of this story, I don't know, read her book, essentially how she promoted it. Naturally, all of Book Talk, especially dark romance Book Talk, was pretty upset by this. Understandably so. I was very upset when I saw this. I think that dark romance as a genre gets a lot of backlash, and I have some dark romances behind me, but dark romance is taboo. It explores darker themes, morally gray characters. It definitely explores more of the darker sides, a little bit of mafia, some stalker romances, things like that.
Okay, besties of mine, I feel like this is a long overdue conversation that I've been wanting to have, okay? Every single time I make a video about a dark romance book, about Zayd Meadows, about Killian Carson, there's always people in the comments telling me that it's not okay to like those books. Let's talk. I want to make it very clear that you can enjoy and explore different themes within a book and not at all support those things in real life. That is why it is fiction, that is why it is fantasy, and that is why it is there. Because I love Haunting Adeline, because I love God of Malice, because I read dark romance, does this mean that I support any of the things that happen in those books in real life? Absolutely fucking not, okay? That being said, that of course also does not mean that I support any real life unalivers, because there is a difference between the fiction of it and the reality of it.
People who don't understand the genre tend to think that these types of books glamorize abusive relationships. And when you go on to promote your book alongside an actual serial killer and abuser next to your book, next to a book that you're calling dark romance, it then makes it seem like a guy like Wade Wilson, it makes it seem like that's what we like to enjoy, or those are the types of men that we like to read about, which I will tell you, knowing the story of Wade Wilson, knowing what he did, I could never fall for a character like that in a book. I could never side with a character like that in a book, and that's the part of romance that I think she's forgotten about. You're supposed to make these characters likable. In a way, with their morally gray characters, you sort of root for them in a way. I don't root for Wade Wilson. Let me give you an example. One of the most popular, or at least well-known, dark romances that people tend to think is one of the darker ones on Book Talk is Haunting and Hunting Adeline. I've only read Haunting Adeline. I haven't read Hunting yet. And I have a whole blog about me reading it as well. And I gave it, and I actually really liked it. Now, like I said, this book does explore darker themes. It's a stalker romance. But I think that, and of course, when you don't quite understand the genre, you may think, why would you want to read a book about a guy who's basically a stalker? But I think that the men in these books do what they do because it is written in a world where that is acceptable. These, at the end of the day, dark romances, they're fantasy. They're not in real life. Real life, these characters do not exist. It is a fantasy. It is within a fictional world, as well as the discussion of consent, the discussion of falling in love and romance is always a part of these books. And I will tell you, I think every single man that I have read about in dark romance would absolutely hate Wade Wilson. I said this also on Threads. These men stand for something. They don't go on to abuse women or use them. It is a romance where these characters, they're morally gray. They're not real. This world isn't real. There is a difference between what happens in these books and what happens in real life. These books are not a justification for abuse, nor are these books a justification, nor are they a justification of a serial killer like Wade Wilson, and should not be linked between the two. true crime and dark romance don't go with one another. I'm going to insert here some of the other reactions from other book talkers about this whole situation.
Tell me why I came across this author who was marketing their book by comparing the plot to a real-life killer case. I know that I normally try to keep it very positive and lighthearted here on my page, but I can't just sit here and not say anything about this topic. Well, what this author did, and what some people are doing in this book talk community, it's seriously harmful and disrespectful to the victims and their families.
Book talk has been fucking on one. What is happening? So I just caught myself up on this situation that we have going on right here. If you don't know what's happening, this author, her name is, I think that's how you say it. Basically, she wrote this book and she's using the Wade unalivings to promote it, basically romanticizing this dude. Look, okay, I'm all for the dark romance. I mean, I've been getting into it lately. The whole romanticizing psychopaths, like, I get it. But you cannot use a real life situation for marketing. That is just, can you imagine what the families of his victims are going through right now, all to just find out that some author is like trying to capitalize off of that?
There's a difference between writing complex, flawed characters and glorifying actual violence that takes place in the real world. And again, this goes back to the discussion about true crime. I think that for some people, true crime has become one of the things that they just put on while they're doing the dishes, or something that they think of as just something they can listen to when they're bored, or a documentary they can pop on while they're eating their lunch in between work. And I think that it's become, for some people, very desensitized. You've got tons of true crime YouTubers, tons of true crime documentaries all over every single streaming platform that has done sometimes ethical and unethical things with victim stories. And I think that that consumption has made people like her, and well as other people, very desensitized to the fact that these are real life stories and not just a soap opera. As myself, as somebody who consumes true crime, there was at one point when I had to step back and really think about ethical consumption of this content. Am I watching the right channels or listening to the right podcasts that are not just talking about the sensation of the crime itself, but really getting into the heart of why this story is so tragic and why something like this happened, as well as giving honor and talking about said victims as more than just the victims of these criminals, that they are real, they had lives, they had people who loved them, and what happened to them was so tragic and heartbreaking. And I think that that is what a lot of people have missed when it comes to true crime consumption. And so with that comes people like these authors who think that it's okay to link the two when they should have nothing to do with each other. Reading dark romance and consuming true crime are two things that are very separate. These books are fictional. These books explore taboo topics. These books are like a fantasy. These books are made to consume, but not made to be brought into the real world. Even authors who've written these books that I have behind me, have completely denounced the idea of linking their stories to someone like Wade Wilson. They find it to be very disrespectful and definitely don't want to be linked to someone as awful as that. I think this conversation surrounds so many topics about true crime, about dark romance. Now, the author did respond to a lot of the backlash that she got on Book Talk, and the response was awful. I'm just gonna be honest, it was awful. Yeah, it was bad. And here's what she said. I'm gonna read it off over here. By the way, I had to screenshot this because she took it down. Luckily, I caught it in enough time, but here's what she had to say. This book is in no way about him. It was published before he was even a thing. I only used him because he's relevant and recent, because there are people interested in his case. His case is horrible, obviously, or he wouldn't be on death row. Many people enjoy learning about people like him, and that's why I used him to market as well. I literally don't know how else I can say this. I'm not trying to make anyone upset or anything. I literally am am just appealing to a certain audience, and most people don't fall under that audience. My books are dark. My books are dark romance because they are dark and a romance. There are books worse than mine. If many took the time to look, I also have a list of trigger warnings before you even get to the book. I literally am just a person who made a post that people didn't care for. This happens every day. I did remove the post, as I've said. I think this author really doesn't quite grasp the severity of linking those two things together. A lot of her other posts have been this whole, oh, you know, woe is me, people don't understand me, jumps on you when you're doing something wrong. But then, what was that weird post she put up? And says, what the herd hates most is the one who thinks differently. It's not so much the opinion itself, but the audacity of wanting to think of themselves something that they do not know how to do. And there's that little picture. For some reason, she's trying to make it seem like she's like a martyr in this, or like she's so radical in her thinking that 10 years down the road, we're all gonna be like, wow, remember that author who used a real life serial killer to like promote one of her books? Yeah, I remember her. She was right. She was so smart. She was forward thinking. She thought outside of the box, and really, we should be celebrating her. I don't know where she thinks this is gonna happen or when she thinks this is gonna happen, but no, you're not some sort of a genius, or you're not, no, stop, no.
When did I say I was fawning over him? Never once said that. Dahmer, on the other hand. This is a comment that was left not even 30 minutes ago under Cassie Raffel, the author that used Wade Wilson, the mass murderer, as a marketing ploy for her romance novel. And you might think that after getting called out by half of the internet and told that you are a piece of shit human being, you would issue some kind of apology, whether it be to everyone who had to see what you posted, or maybe just the victims' families. She didn't do that. She actually doubled down multiple times about that not only is Cassie a piece of shit human being, her husband Michael Raffel is just as much. I've also been informed that they are allegedly parents, and if that is the case, literally pray for their children, and I'm not joking, like pray for their children. Talking about how the haters are paying for her coffee. She then made this general statement basically saying, if you don't like my marketing ploy, then my book's probably not for you. No shit, Cassie.
Hey, friendly little reminder that we should not be using literal, real serial killers as inspiration for our main male characters in a romance novel. We do not need to be using women's literal suffering and pain and death to our advantage. Wade Wilson is a murderer, not a broody, misunderstood dark romance character.
My closing thoughts are that I'm happy that the dark romance community called her out. Our genre gets a lot of flack within the book talk space, which some of it, yeah, is totally warranted. I think we all need to remember that this is taboo, as in it's not normal. Like, these books aren't normal, but these books, the topics, what these characters do are not normal and should never be normalized. But it's within this fantasy, and that is okay. It's okay to explore this fantasy within these books. It's a healthy way to do that. Exploring one's sexuality, like I've said in the previous video, certain things that they like isn't a bad thing, as long as it is kept within the safe confines of consent, or at least within the fantasy of these books. What is not a fantasy is what Wade Wilson did. What is not a fantasy is the lives that he took from these people's families and their friends and people who loved them dearly. That is not a fantasy. Wade Wilson is exactly where he's supposed to be, on death row. He doesn't deserve to have a romance. He doesn't deserve to have all of this attention, or women fawning over him, or calling the jail, or sending him pictures, which I'm very happy that some of that is going to get exposed. He doesn't deserve to have a happy ending, because he took that life and took that opportunity and took that chance from other people. This author will continue on, just like any other person who does something wrong, to think that the whole internet is against them. But I hope they look inward and realize that you messed up. You should not put those two worlds together. You should not glamorize people who take the lives of others in such a brutal, horrible, awful way. And true crime and dark romance don't go with each other. Yeah, and that's it. That's all I have. Did you hear about Wade Wilson? Did you hear about what this author did? Are you a dark romance reader? How do you feel about dark romance? I know a lot of you really can't stand book talk, and that's understandable. Understandable, especially when things like this happen. But just know that she does not represent that community, especially the dark romance community. In fact, the dark romance community is the one that got on her case the most. So thank you for listening, and I will see you another time. Oh, also, I want to do a live reading. Wait, what? I want to go on live and do some reading sprints here on YouTube. I put out a little poll and it looks like we're going to be doing them Saturday mornings, so I will announce what date that has when I have time. But thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye.